Hello, everyone. Welcome to a brand new episode of the Jams and Tea Podcast Record Club, kinda, sorta, where we just talk about whatever we want to sometimes. And today we're having a kinda special one-off episode where myself and returning guest of the podcast and many podcasts on this channel, Jen, and we're going to be talking about a subject that isn't really talked about all that much these days. That being, of course, we're going to be talking about Johnny Cash's legendary live album at Folsom Prison, a legendary record from an artist that we both have close ties to. And of course, we're going to be talking about the legendary Outlaw Country classic that was released the exact same year, as a matter of fact, which is Mama Tried by Merle Haggard and the Strangers, but primarily attributed to Merle Haggard. Two classics that we're going to be talking about today, which is weird because this is yeah, as I alluded to, this is not a particularly relevant genre anymore, despite their status as legends in the world of music today. I think it's safe to say that even in the realm of singer-songwriters, which Johnny Cash is held in pretty high esteem, it still feels like we live in a world that's very divorced from when these artists felt like they were particularly prescient. So, Jen, why don't you take us back a little bit and talk about the recording and a little bit of the story of the recording of At Folsom Prison?
Yeah, it's kind of a long story. It's
Yeah,
night
with a lot of surprising names too.
so it's 1951. Johnny Cash is serving in the military and watches a documentary about Folsom Prison with his units.
Mhm.
That leads to the writing and recording of Folsom Prison Blues, which I mean that became one of his bigger hits at the time. It's even covered on Mama Tried. Uh,
Yep,
one
which
of
is
the,
really funny.
it's really funny. One of the, I mean, it's a staple of his music.
Oh yeah.
As he is working with Columbia Records and getting bigger throughout the 60s with more straightforward country hits like I Walk the Line and Ring of Fire. He was gaining a kind of different vein of popularity where he was becoming a kind of more mainstream artist. But he had held on to this interest in wanting to do shows in prisons, which I want to talk about a bit more later as like a performance idea, but I think
Yeah.
is really interesting. But fast forward a little bit to it's January 1968. Johnny Cash and the Tennessee Three and June Carter and some other folks all travel out to California and they do two shows at Folsom Prison. And these two performances, mostly the first one, are what makes up the songs that appear on the album, which
One thing I want to elaborate on here is that the reason that Johnny Cash was able to do this recording in the first place is because the head of Columbia Records at the time had changed and to a man named Bob Johnson, who was a very controversial and kind of erratic figure in music history, who Johnny was able to convince basically to record these performances as a live album, and Bob Johnson was going to produce them. And I have much to say about Bob Johnson's contribution here because the production work on this album is quite a marvel to behold, frankly.
yeah, so they do the performance. The performance is released as a live album, which I don't know much about the history of the idea of the live album. Was this like a big thing at the time in other
It's
places?
it's really more of like a novelty. Like there, every sort of branching, sort of different style of release in music has some sort of link to its original usage of just like what was the best distribution model to make the most money. And I'm pretty sure that just live recordings were sort of something that picked up steam. But I think that the idea of like the live recording as a format or just like as an idea to be released as an album hadn't really picked up steam yet. So like the idea of like miking something or like setting something up in order to be a live performance to be consumed later on is definitely a novel concept at this point.
I think again the kind of novel concept is the idea of the setting, right? We have a normal live album that takes place in a big, concert hall with an orchestra or a big band. And so everybody, has paid to be there. And that I always think about the energy of the audience on a live album as an
Mm-hmm.
incredibly important part of its construction. And there's plenty we can say about that. But the idea of one of the bigger stars who was admittedly on a decline in the years preceding the recording of Folsom Prison, but still, this was a guy with a lot of weight behind him who wanted to do a very specific thing and make that into kind of a tent pole release for him as a musician. Because I want to get into kind of performativity theory with Outlaw Country,
Mm-hmm.
because I think this is a very interesting topic that connects back to some other conversations that you and I and folks on the podcast have been having this week with regards to two certain artists that have been putting out a lot of music in the past few days. Um, but the idea of the persona in connection with the album and the album release. And what I think is interesting about At Folsom Prison is it's Johnny Cash riding the line of outlaw and country as a genre and as a persona, right? Where he's playing both roles of kind of a cohort for the prison inmates in a way,
Mm-hmm.
especially seen in how some moments of the performance are captured, and also still be kind of separate from them as a person who wants to provide an experience not just to them but to like record executives and his wider audience. And so it's this really interesting kind of meet in the middle scenario between a really fascinating piece of performance art and a legitimately challenging career move to analyze for an artist with this kind of legacy. So, like, what do you think about all that?
I just kind of love the conceit of everything about At Folsom Prison. And when listening to these two albums, that's a word I thought of a lot was the word conceit, is because everything about the songwriting and the concepts that are in these albums, they're so detailed, they're so refined, and they're so infinitely marvelous and how razor sharp they all are. Like it's very lost just because a lot of these are standards. And the thing is that I'm glad we're linking this into performativity theory because that's exactly where I was headed to, even though I didn't clue you into that. But this is just a meeting of the Kentucky minds, as they say. I love looking at all of the context that informs something and then seeing how the difference in what my reaction would be with that context and without that context, just because it goes to show you how putting a little bit of extra work into something can truly enhance your opinion of it. And that's not to say that At Folsom Prison is not rawly a piece of work to be marveled at, which it totally is. First and foremost, because of that recording that I was talking about earlier. The recording setup of At Folsom Prison is remarkable. I did listen to the remaster of this, but just the way that everything is mic'd here is so perfect. It's a little bit worn, it's a little bit rustic, like it definitely has a live performance feel to it. It's a little bit rougher, especially with the vocals, but like just the way that everything is sort of hard panned in the mix, but everything has sort of a very, very clear spot that just sort of gives itself room to breathe. Like Johnny is always in the center, the guitar is usually like on the left, the drums are usually on the right, and it's just like it gives you this crispness that's just absolutely lovely. Like to think that this was recorded before the 70s existed is like what do you fucking mean? Like it feels like something that should have had some level of studio involvement on some level. And yeah, they did rehearse these shows before they played them and stuff, but you know, the amount of work that it takes to set this kind of thing up is work that should be like paid attention to, because it's something special. It really adds a very, very elemental rustic charm to this that just gives it that perfect amount of texture to be able to appreciate the core parts of what make this so great. And to link it back to the whole performativity theory thing is that a lot of people don't realize is that a lot of classic country albums and even a lot of classic outlaw country albums, like once the sort of industry fractured into genres and started, you know, splintering in the way that it did, albums became something that meant different things in different contexts. And it's very funny that this genre that is associated with authenticity so often started with albums that very often were covers albums. They were covers of lots of standards. They were covers of songs that had been written 50 years before they had recorded them. And even then, they were still like recycled over and over and over again. Like there's a bunch of songs on here that were written in the 50s, for example, and yet this is still something that's associated with, you know, authenticity. You would think that these classic songwriters, right, that they would write all of their songs, but that's not what it was about. It wasn't about the egoism of your penmanship and like being authorial. It was about preserving something. And that's what Johnny Cash does on here. He preserves something for this audience of prison inmates, this audience of people who, you know, historically the American prison system has forgotten this group of people. And notably, Folsom Prison was not fully segregated. So this was an audience of people who were multiple skin colors, which is notable. There have been lots of pictures that have been circulated of the audience at Folsom Prison over the years that have sort of like debated, I think, the amount of different percentages of races in the audience. And but I think later it was confirmed by the photographer that the way that they were segregated just allowed for them to get easily photographed white faces, unfortunately. But still, the fact that Johnny Cash went and delivered this preservation of this experience to them is meaningful in some way. But he mixes it in with his own songs too, of course, like Folsom Prison Blues. But doing that is such a like think about that for a moment. Think about the intimacy of recording a song about these people, about this place years before this, and then coming back to it and then performing it in front of them. And it's like, this is a song about how miserable their lives are. This is a song about how every day sucks for them. And they're singing along with him. They're clapping, stomping their feet, and they're like, hell yeah, man, speak on it. And
Hooting and hollering.
it's like that's the energy of this. It's electric. Like you feel like when like there's a mildly like I don't want to jump the gun too far on this, but like there's a moment on the closer, Greystone Chapel, that's like mildly kind of euphoric when everybody starts really kind of like revving up and the hooting and hollering gets like really sort of like rhythmic, and you're like you feel this kind of swell right before the song ends, and you're just like there's just this communal energy here that the live setting can only harness in its most effective form, like here. Like I don't really feel like the rapport between audience and artist has ever been more captivating on a live record, at least that I've heard, than it is right here.
This as a live album is interesting to me because in the way that it's mixed and in the way that it's presented, the audience is a very important part of the album as a piece of art, right?
Hmm.
Um, which is a thing that I want to very intentionally contrast with like modern live albums, which feel very much What's a nice way to put this? Like a substitute for actually being there, you know what I mean?
Very heavily orchestrated, like there's something that still feels like there's another degree of separation from the live experience in trying to preserve the live experience. There's a dissonance there, I guess.
Yeah, but a great thing about Folsom Prison is by listening to it, you really feel the spirit of these people and also like get an idea of the social paradigms that are kind of driving them. There are moments on this album where in between songs, somebody will just get up on stage and go, "You over there need to be seen somewhere else. Can you leave, please?"
There's like an announcement on the intercom, and there's like one of my favorite things about this is just the constant, very humorous interjections of Johnny at various points in the song. Like he'll just be like chugging along in a song that sounds like, again, the most beautifully sort of like simple song ever written, and he's going at it. The guitarist is going off, drummer's going off, and he's hollering, and then all of a sudden on like one little vocal refrain, he'll be like, it's just so fucking good.
He's great. His little asides of like, I can play a harmonica faster than I can kiss a duck. just
Yes,
just
I love
saying
that.
shit, just saying shit to get people excited is
Like he
so
sounds a
fun.
little nervous. Like you can kind of tell like he's maybe got a little bit like, oh wow, this is performance nerves. Woohoo.
And this is where I kind of want to get into the song choices because this is also a part of this album's construction that feels very unique of Johnny very intentionally choosing songs that he knows are going to do well, not just because they're his big hits, but again, because he's considering his audience and the situation that him and his band are going in and how to give this crowd, right, the best show that they can get. Obviously, starting with Folsom Prison Blues is a genius choice for many reasons, right?
Naturally.
For one, it's where he is, like
Yeah.
on a base level. That's just fucking cool, right?
Barn burner.
We all know the feeling of like going to see a concert and there's a song that's about the place where the concert is
The
happening
home team.
and the unique energy that takes over a room when you know you're gonna get that moment starts with that, right? It
Hmm.
starts with the celebration of here we are in this place that inspired my arts, and so I'm gonna share that with you. And one of the funniest things about this album, one of the best things about it is just the things that get a rise out of the crowd
Hmm.
that Johnny will say. I shot a man in
Anything
Reno
even
just to watch
slightly
him
crass or crude, like even slightly, he knows, and you could hear the smile on his face when he says these lines.
of like I shot a man in Reno just to watch him die
Just to
is
watch him
said
die.
very intentionally, and the band like practically takes an extra measure to let the crowd finish jeering
Yep.
before the next line starts.
God, that is one thing that I super want to compliment about this, because what's another thing that's going to be super underrated about a given live performance is just who is behind the instruments, because the band here playing absolutely fucking rocks, man. Like the guitar playing in this gets like straight up fucking, there's some like Leonard Skinner shit that happens at the end of this album. It's fucking legit. Somewhat like the drummer on fucking Orange Blossom Special, man, he is hammering out some fills in between those verses, being like, it is so good. It's so good.
Everybody is going for it, right? They're not here. This is going to sound like a bad comparison, but like it's not a charity performance. Like they're having fun. They're
Yeah, yeah.
really trying to like put their best foot forward. And you can really tell as the album goes on that the band is really like getting into it and cutting
Mm-hmm.
loose and just having a better time as the
Yep.
show goes on.
Yeah, it's progressively they just kind of get a little bit looser, and that's what's so awesome about it, just because it keeps the energy going even in moments where it sort of feels like, because it is very much designed as an album. Like it's almost like that Johnny Cash almost invents the playlist on this album, just because he's taking all these different songs, but he's constructing them in a way that makes sense for the experience. It's why I'm so fond of things like for example, the sequencing of the two most irreverent songs on here, which is Dirty Old Egg Sucking Dog and Flushed from the Bathroom of Your Heart, which, first of all, the audacity to sequence The Wall and then Dirty Old Egg Sucking Dog. It's like this is one of the bleakest songs I've ever heard in my life. And then immediately afterwards, it's just like, yeah, that old fucking dog, I'm gonna bash its fucking head. It feels like almost every other line, Johnny's just like, maybe I shouldn't have picked this song. People are a little bit too into this one.
and
It's
and
so
then
good.
and then he just keeps the bit going with Flush in the Bathroom of Your Heart of like, yeah, I just sang you a song about a guy killing himself. Now how about
And
this?
and it's like, and again, this is like this is the original 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover by Paul Simon. This is like the incredibly dark song conceit, but veiled through a bunch of really simple, basic, humorous metaphors that he just repeats over and over and over again. And you're just like, are you gonna run out of these? And that's why you get the flushed from the bathroom of your heart. It's like that's such a silly ass thing, but it's done intentionally. Like the silliness is used to bring the crowd back up from the fact that The Wall is such a fucking downtrodden ass song, and he's like, I need to pick things back up so that we can go into the final fucking segment of this album. And that's why like the sequencing choices on here are so pivotal. It's just like it doesn't matter that Johnny Cash didn't write all of these songs. The performance is what like matters, and the way that the energy flows is still like it's perfect for the experience.
Which leads me to another point about like the sequencing. It's so cool doing Cocaine Blues, a
Oh,
song about being an absolute fucking heathen, the most
uh-huh.
hedonistic thing you've ever heard. And then the song right after that is 25 Minutes to Go, which is all gallows humor. And as it goes
Oh,
on, it transitions from being, like I said, it's gallows humor. Like it is
yeah,
funny, but the way it
very.
ends is almost like solemn when he finally gets to the end of the song and he's actually dying. The room is silent.
Oh yeah, this whole album where like every single story that Johnny tells in these songs, it's like I feel like I am watching a reel of a Coen Brothers movie playing in my head, even to the point where the live album aspect of it feels like some sort of metafictional thing that they would play with in one of their screenplays or something. It's like there just feels like there's so much tangibility to what's going on here that, again, you do really like feel like you are right there on stage with Johnny Cash. It's crazy what a pair of nice headphones will do for the mixes on this.
Yeah, I will say that. Listen with a good set of Pano speakers for best experience. Let's talk about Jackson. Can we talk about Jackson? Oh my
Well, this is
God.
like to me, like I love, of course, the back to back of the two very funny songs on the album, but Jackson through Greystone Chapel is when this album goes from incredible to absolutely transcendently next level.
Right. Like I think about a lot of these recordings. Like these are how I listen to these songs. I don't listen to the studio recordings of
Yep,
half the songs on this album. Like
damn right.
once you get this, you're not gonna walk away from it. And hearing how much fun Johnny and June are having, like
Hmm.
straining their voices to get through the song
I
is
I
so
love
good.
how their voices almost they don't have harmony. Like they clash against each other. They cut through each other and it's really raw and it's like it almost like feels like it's the rawest part of a live recording, which is kind of nuts.
The original, it's the original We Cry Together.
Holy shit.
Holy shit.
Woo!
But yeah, let's talk about the final few songs on this album because an interesting thing happens where June comes up for Jackson and then just kind of stays on stage for the rest of the
Mhm.
4 tracks that are going to follow, which is Give My Love to Rose, which is a very slow, very sad number. Um, very good. But then we get into what is for me, and honestly, I'm kind of embarrassed that this used to be my like least favorite part of the album was the final 3 songs. Because
Oh,
now that I've like grown up with it a lot, I'm like, I can't fucking wait until we get to I Got Stripes.
I mean, like, what a fucking banger! What a banger!
And this is another thing of like picking the songs for the audience, right? There are so many songs here that all of the people in the audience are going to have a very unique perspective about,
Mhm.
especially the first one and the last 3, which I really want to go in deep on because all 3
Mhm.
of them get more complex and more specific in kind of how they relate to the experience of the people at Folsom Prison. So like
Yeah,
I Got Stripes is kind of a continuation of the gallows humor of 25 minutes to go, but it's not so much gallows humor, but it's, I don't know, prison humor, just like
yeah,
being in prison and how in this fucked up, guys, it's kind of black comedy in a more
yeah.
straightforward
It's
way.
very colloquial. Like it feels lived in.
Yeah. And it's interesting how so much of what we talk about when we criticize the prison system is how long anything takes to get done. But one of the best songs about the prison experience is one that is about how in 5 days you can become under the jail.
Yep,
And
yep.
that's the whole joke because, it's kind of true in a different way.
No, that is.
And then there's Green Green Grass of Home, which is going to become relevant also to the Merle Haggard album, but is a very interesting penultimate song again for this experience. And do you want to go in on this one?
This is I mean it was written originally by one Mr. Claude Putman Jr. and recorded by Mr. Johnny Darrell in 1965. And this passed through several different people. Again, this is a big, long-held standard in the world of music. And basically, like the singer in this returns to his home for the first time since like he was a kid, and basically he comes back from the train and like his parents are there, his girlfriend comes back to join them. They meet him with arms reaching, smiling sweetly, and then the singer goes through like and like lists all these emblems of his childhood, the like the oak tree that he used to play on. And but it very abruptly shifts perspective, and this reminiscence, which is like so detailed is and like intimate, is just sort of just like shakes you awake basically, and it's all a dream. And it was just sort of a wishful thinking on their part, and they awake to see nothing but four gray walls around them. And the just the knife twist of this song conceit is so well executed in both iterations of this song that we'll talk about. And it feels like, again, it almost sounds rote when you describe it in like when you just describe like what the dynamic of the song flip is, but it really just is super effective at getting you to understand the perspective of what it must be like to just sort of, have a little bit, a tiny inkling of hope, and then have it immediately snatched away from you like that.
Again, it's a thing that's perfect for this experience, these people, but the ultimate version of this, which is, I mean, just thinking about this story, it feels too good to be true. Like it feels like a folk tale.
Mm-hmm.
But it happened and it's on the record and we can listen to it. Is the story of Greystone Chapel, which, as the story goes, as the band was in town, they came in contact with one of the inmates named Glenn Shirley. And he said, I wrote a song and gave him like the lyrics and played it for them. And they decided to, for the concert, which Shirley attended, supposedly very close to the stage. We end the concert with Johnny saying, I want to sing a song that was written here in Folsom Prison, and it's called Greystone Chapel. And it's all about a real wing of the prison, and it's dedicated to the kind of church in the prison. And it's about the potential for embracing a higher power in a setting like this, and how for the narrator, and presumably for Shirley, this was a thing that was very foundational for him as an inmate. And the experience of hearing Johnny like describe how this song came to him and what he intends to do with it, it feels like a real genuine act of artistic, yes, but also like community advocacy and preservation, right?
Mhm.
Of this isn't just about me. I have been changed by this experience. And in the same way that he did with Folsom Prison Blues, I want to reflect that in my work, in my art. And it's just such a powerful moment. It's such a powerful song. I listened to it today to prepare for this episode, but honestly, I don't think I've ever stopped thinking about it sometimes.
It's such a deeply moving song. It takes your breath away in the way that like it's a strange comparison, but like just lyrically, just like what it's about is just like it feels like I'm listening to like a great like classic Midwest emo song that's about like some shitty little town in the middle of nowhere, and we're like honing in on like one of these really like specific sort of like it's that exact same intimate vibe channeled into this one particular moment that's just it's so very specific. You really do feel like you can just sort of like again the way that everything is mic'd here, it's just like even the way that the sound reverberates, it's just it's a there's a chilling kind of experience when you like just sort of take in the fact that the last sort of stretch of this song is just sort of shuffling around like the song sort of ends, but the recording just sort of keeps on going for a little while, and you just sort of hear people moving and people talking for a moment, and it's just like there's something just kind of eerie about it, that it just captures the moment it ends and then stops. That this immortal thing that they're talking about, and again, like when they're even singing about impermanence and then willfully choose to not end the recording there is a very interesting artistic choice, I think.
Yeah, the kind of epilogue to the song has always stuck with me, where the band does this kind of usual end of the show, big bands, freak out, even though that's not
Uh-huh.
what the song is like at all, which I just think is really endearing. But then yeah, you just hear the recording kind of keep going. And then again with the mixing, there's not a lot of backing vocals on the album, which
No.
is why when the legitimate harmony of Johnny and June and one of the other members of the band show up,
Mhm.
it completely pushes forward everything we've heard up to this point in the recording. And God, it sounds so good every single time. Because we get a little bit of like funny backing vocals with I Got Stripes, and which is
Yeah.
another that's an impressive feat alone in the mix, but
Yeah, it is.
oh, just how good everybody sounds together on Greystone Chapel is a big reason why that song is as impactful as it is for me.
No, absolutely. It feels like the only possible way an experience like this that feels so sort of liminal, like it could just sort of fade away in an instant, just sort of like the final stamp on it that makes it solidify into something real. That it's just it really just shows you the potential of the live album format in a way that is still legitimately impressive and effective. And this was something that was made in the late 60s, and it was coming from a genre and from a voice that had been seen to have like faded in artistic relevance somewhat. But this, I would argue, like, this is Johnny Cash's classic album. Like, it's not an album where he wrote all of the songs or where he has like all these classic moments. It was just this one thing that he decided to do for these people this one time, and that became his immortal classic. Much like the fact that I would argue that his other really big classic contributions to music are also covers. They're his covers albums that he recorded later on in life, the American series.
Mm.
And those became like so transformative that they became their own legacy. So like I just think that the idea of how adaptive the artistic voice is in music is so present within Johnny Cash.
Yeah, and also the idea of the musician as the persona is something that Johnny Cash has a really interesting relationship with. I've talked a lot about country music on this show, both things I like and things I don't. And I remember when we were talking about Walker Hayes, I said this is an album that I feel like exists to be a income stream, is basically what I said.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the thing is, like when I talk about country music as blue collar music, I'm thinking about not just like producing music and releasing albums as a type of work, but also like traveling and performing and being
Mm-hmm.
present as part of the work. And for me, that second part is normally the primary characteristic of a lot of like big country musicians, right? What
Yeah.
defines them what defines them to some extent isn't even the music itself, but the fact that they work so hard to bring it into and keep it in the world, right? And the
Mm-hmm.
things that we do to preserve our art. And country music is full of demonstrations of that and conversations about that. If we're thinking forward, I'm thinking about like Garth Brooks's
That
discography and
yeah,
his
that's what I was thinking about.
history. Yeah, and his history with like how he puts out music and how he performs and how he does shows. And frankly, I think Zach Bryan is also in this kind of place
Yes.
too, right? Where it's not just being about being an artist, it's about being a person that is working and like this is my work and this is my job and this is what I do. And acknowledging that and saying that it is not mutually exclusive with the idea of being an artist is I think a really important thing that a lot of genres are starting to kind of lose track of as certain people get richer off of doing this kind of work because it's still work no matter how rich those people are getting from it.
It lets you kind of interrogate the idea of what sort of, these genres, these divides in the first place. There's a lot of like broader systemic things that have to do with all of the designations between different kinds of music and the reason that genres exist in the first place. But I think Garth Brooks is an interesting person to come back to when talking about this because, like, if you want to be technical about things, Garth Brooks is like one of the most successful artists in the history of American recorded music. And simultaneously, he holds almost no cultural cachet right now. Like, when was the last time you heard a Garth Brooks song? When was the last time you heard someone talk about a Garth Brooks song? And again, if he's supposed to be the tippy top, it's like, well, then what's going on here? It's like there's so much density to that issue that we could make, honestly, probably a 4 hour long documentary on if we were to tear into that kind of shit. But to me, Johnny Cash embodies basically the idea that country music isn't that like, oh, it's not trying necessarily to say like, oh, these, rustic Americana guys that have these hard-worn, living experiences, these are artists. It's really supposed to be the opposite. It's that anybody can be an artist, including these people, which is why that it has a lot of blue collar roots. No matter how these establishments took advantage of these kinds of things by, corralling them into different genres and whatnot, and putting them different places and organizing radio the way that they did, which is why country music was as much on an island as it was and always has been. Thank you, Nashville. But Johnny Cash still somehow manages to be this weird anomaly where he's taken super seriously in like every possible circle, and just like he's like the epitome of what you think of when you think of a songwriter, despite the fact that all of his most notable works are things where he only wrote the songs on like a third of what the album is. So it really makes you reconsider just like what makes art special, what makes the act of performance special. And I think no better point can be made for what makes the act of performance special, the idea of an inspiration. And inspiration affected a one Mr. Merle Haggard one day in prison. Because you see, when Johnny Cash became very interested in the idea of performing in different prisons, obviously he had been doing that for a long time, since before at Folsom Prison. That was just an idea to record one of the things that he was already going to be doing. So, way earlier on, in good gosh golly, I had the year down here somewhere, but I can't remember it now. But it was in, because here's the thing. The reason that I forget immediately is because Merle Haggard has been in jail approximately 40,000 times. Dude has been arrested, acquitted, arrested again, and been in and out of jail more times than any rapper currently working or not working, alive or dead. This dude is as like, again,
Citation needed, but yeah, probably.
yes, this dude is as salt of the earth as they come. But one of his prison stints happened to be graced by the presence of one Mr. Johnny Cash at one of his many prison performances, and Merle Haggard later went on to cite this performance as pivotal in inspiring him to become a musician. And Merle Haggard has, frankly, a fascinating life. Just the guy has a really sad story, actually. His parents sort of like they lived in Oklahoma during the Great Depression, but they moved like I think west when their barn burned down in 1934, which bad time to have your barn burned down. And basically lived in like a boxcar for years. Their property, I remember when reading about it, and it was described as the property later had a bathroom added onto it, and it's like, oh Jesus. And unfortunately, his father died when he was very, very young. He was 9 years old, in fact. And he later went on to say that this deeply affected him as a child, and it caused him to be a bit of a mama's boy. And he sort of pivoted to really valuing the love of his mother, which is interesting because it's sort of the conceit of the album title, which is sort of, I guess, if you want to reverse engineer it, it's the title track, album title, whatever, which is Mama Tried, which is his album that came out in 1968, the exact same years at Folsom Prison, where at Folsom Prison, or wait, at Folsom Prison, Folsom Prison Blues is covered on here, where also Green Green Grass of Home is as well. But Mama Tried is the album title and the first song on here, and this is sort of this is his Folsom Prison Blues, the sort of
Yeah.
classic that he's remembered for, where the conceit of this song is that he is sort of contextualizing his behavior growing up through the lens of his mother watching him and seeing him still, disobeying and like, just being a bad kid despite the instruction and love and continued support of his mom. And then, when you learn a little bit more about Merle Haggard, you're like, oh, wow, that is just actually what happened to him. And this is a song about how he felt. And what's fascinating about the album Mama Tried is when I listened to this, it was like, wow, despite the fact that this has only fucking 4 songs on it that are actually written by Merle Haggard, is that this is effectively a concept album. It's a concept album about how your life and perspective changes after you spend most of your life in prison and then you get out and then you irreversibly see the changes of the world around you and how you've been powerless to do anything about it. And it's a very like quietly heartbreaking record throughout the entirety of it, honestly.
All of it is kind of about different times in Merle Haggard's life where he is struggling and examining himself and his relationships and how he kind of got there. Because a thing that I think is interesting about Mama Tried, and a thing that I think has made it age very well, is that the central conceit is that, yeah, my mama did her best. I'm just kind of a piece of shit.
I kind of suck. Like
I'm just kind of a dysfunctional person.
it's a very, very effective, very vivid character portrait boiled down to the fact that, like, there's a song on here that essentially boils down to like, well, I'm always going to be paranoid that you cheated on me forever, so I'm just going to be completely dysfunctional until I die. And that's also really compounded by the fact that, yes, Merle Haggard's wife did in fact cheat on him and have another man's baby while he was in prison.
Oh my
Ow.
God.
Ah.
Oh my God. No, because okay, this is something I want to kind of go on a tangent about. Country music has a really fascinating history with portrayals of infidelity.
Mm-hmm.
One of the I was for completely unrelated but certainly prevalent reasons, I was looking just out of curiosity on the Wikipedia article list of diss tracks.
Ah.
And one of the first ones is a song called It Wasn't God Who Made Honky Tonk Angels by Kitty Wells, which was a response to a song by Hank Thompson called The Wild Side of Life. And what Kitty Wells is doing on this song is basically saying unfaithful men make unfaithful women, because Hank Thompson's song was all about, oh, these unfaithful women. So Kitty Wells is doing a kind of response to that. And so
Uh-huh.
that's where we start the kind of depiction of gender essentialism and
Mm-hmm.
relationships and infidelity in country music that, like I said, we have a lot of good examples of
Uh,
portrayals of this kind of dynamic.
builds to a bit of a boiling point with a very notable song that has been in the cultural consciousness recently, which is Dolly Parton's Jolene. I
Yeah.
think which is a fascinating kind of inversion of what that was originally kind of conceived as. It sort of sees the idea and adds it with a little bit of dimensionality, and that turn is very interesting, and it's especially interesting when you consider that there is a Dolly Parton cover on this album.
Then we have the cover of Green Green Grass of Home. What do you
Mhm.
think about this, both as a song itself and like where it's sequenced on the album?
I found it particularly effective after Mama Tried, just because it allows you to kind of connect the dots, I guess, of like the immediate. It kind of feels like the gap in between these songs is sort of an unspoken smash cut that sort of effectively kind of works as that, like, that sort of mirrors what the song ends up doing with the dynamic flip in it that we talked about earlier. And so that's a really interesting thing. It really sort of ushers you into the misery of the album by sort of going right into little wine drinker me right after you get through that second sobering half of the song. So it's very it's utilized in a very different way, but I feel like it's still utilized in a very effective way. I feel like actually that's true for a lot of what's done on this album.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, a lot of this is covers, but we talked about this with at Folsom Prison, and I think it's true of this album as well, of the the sequencing and the choice to present these songs and seeing that as an intentional decision really gives you an idea as to why they're here in the first place, right? Because you have Little Old Wine Drinker Me, which is another cover, but one that I think is even more interesting to deconstruct is the Dolly Parton cover in the good old days when times were bad illustrates, I think, a very interesting form of nostalgia, which
Yes.
is a big word that applies to this song. It's about the kind of suffering that a poor family endured. And the way I'm going to explain it is going to make it sound like a kind of cheap sentiment, but the underlying thing is that I miss when I still had my family, even when things were demonstrably
Worse.
worse as far as our quality of life. And I think it's like a it's like a almost a suffering from success kind of moment where you get to this point where you're like, I may have made it out of this previous situation in some way, shape, or form. And like undeniably that is good for me, but you're also allowed to kind of miss the things that you did have, which was the people that were there that were important to you.
The way that this album, if I had to say what the most genius thing about it is to me, is that it's the way it keeps showcasing a dynamic perspective or a perspective that flips. It's sort of like it presents a front and then presents an alternative to that front so that there's always sort of a hanging, lingering kind of remembrance of something else that tragically informs whatever you're currently hearing. It's sort of it's utilizing the grass is greener on the other side effect, but with songwriting, if that makes sense. And the way that it constantly sort of flips you back and forth, it makes the it feels like that almost Merle Haggard. The reason I wanted to compare these two albums to begin with is that it almost feels like Merle Haggard and Johnny Cash are in a dialogue with each other, and they're using some of the same songs and the same passages as one another, but in different contexts and in different ways. And because they were both doing something different with their material, and like Johnny Cash was, he was still a very authentic country musician, but he was very much on the outside looking in, trying to sort of understand these prisoners, these inmates after seeing this documentary and just trying to sort of, amalgamate an experience that would suit them, to make it just like a concert, a performance that would best be acclimatized to how they would receive it. Whereas Merle Haggard is using these same components, but relaying a very authentic perspective. It's an inversion, but with the exact same things, but there's no dilution of like purity or authenticity or whatever. It's like we're never calling into question whether or not Johnny Cash is seen or whether he's actually shot a man in Reno or whatever, or whether or not all these things. It's like Merle Haggard's a guy who did all these things that are in these country songs. Like he did have the life that everybody constantly sings about, but he's also still using the artistry of country music that came before him and then mixing it together to make what is, in effect, again, a prototypical concept album.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it is a concept album about his relationships with himself, about his relationships to other people, and that's where I think we get into the more like directly addressing the women in his life, kind
Mm-hmm.
of three or four songs that happen after in the good old days. So
Yes.
there's I could have gone right, which is
Ooh.
basically an encore of Mama Tried, where like I
Mhm.
always had a way out of not being a piece of shit here I
And
am,
I
and I'm a
am.
piece of shit.
Yeah.
Which is a very good and a very kind of face saving prelude to I'll
Yes.
always know.
Which is, it showcases that like, country music has an interesting relationship with women and misogyny. And when I say that, I mean it has a more complicated history than people tend to think, especially when it comes to the fact that there are like, many of the established country icons that we can remember, and some of the biggest people in this industry are in fact women, but also the fact that they have used country music for incredibly progressive kind of, voices and causes is, something that should not be forgotten. Let it be said. That
We've been
said,
talking about that this whole time with Folsom Prison,
yes,
you know.
exactly. And on here, with a lot of these songs and this sequencing, this is very much Merle Haggard relaying, like, you can give him a little bit of the benefit of the doubt here, but you can also know that, like, yeah, we're definitely seeing some authentic feelings bubble to the surface here about you just, the way that someone who's been in prison for this long, a man who lives in the 1950s, 40s, 60s, whatever, is going to view this situation, or is going to view how he sees, how he treats the women in his life, and how that's sort of affected his behavior on a grander, on a larger scale, and has made him kind of a paranoid mess of a person. It's definitely self-consciously excoriating, but there are definitely some undertones that are, shall we say, malleable, I guess.
Yeah, which kind of come up later on the song Run 'Em Off, which
Oh
is
yeah.
again, this album kind of weirdly has a lot of like two-parters that don't
Mm-hmm.
happen one after the other, but a lot of them have a kind of structuralist approach to them that happens in the sequencing where having a previous track in the back of your head is going to change how you receive a song that's going to follow it. And Run 'Em Off is a good example of that, where it's essentially an inversion of I'll Always Know, where he's kind of attempting to overcome the paranoia by asserting that his woman show a little bit of dedication to him and blow off some people who are making advances towards her.
Uh, buddy, I think your foundation might be a little bit flawed.
I think your concern might be a little bit misaligned here, Merle. I don't know. Here's my thing about a lot of these songs.
Mhm.
He's never pretending that he's right.
Oh, I mean, this album is one of the, like, this is an album that is like, yeah, it's about, how the perspective and all the things that I said it was about. It's also an album about self-loathing. I mean, think about what it must take to not even write an album about this, but to assemble a collection of already existing songs with songs that you've written purposefully and carefully to relay to people what your experience is like and how it's changed you. Like, it goes to show you that not only like Merle Haggard, despite the fact that he was this incredibly like flawed habitual criminal, he was also kind of a genius when it comes to song construction. And I mean, like, the songs of his originals slot into this with these other classics like a glove. Like, you'd never know that these are all songs that are written by different people if you weren't, told that, or you sought that information out elsewhere. It's a very cohesive sort of work that we're looking at here, but it makes these sort of iffier moments, they still congeal together to form that, like, yeah, like, of a man in this time who has this experience is going to feel this way. This is an everyman kind of perspective, and we're not trying to soften the edges here. We're not trying to make that into something that it wasn't. He's trying to relay the inherent toxicity that he has. Like, that's literally what Mama Tried is that he's just like, I keep fucking up. This is my problem. I don't listen to people.
And which, after, I will say, my one critique of the album is that Folsom Prison Blues comes out of fucking nowhere.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
It's in between two songs. It's in between two songs called Teach Me to Forget, and then Run 'Em Off follows Folsom
Mhm.
Prison Blues. So it arrives at a pretty awkward time in the sequencing, which is the thing I've given it a lot of credit for.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it feels like he's very intentionally taking an aside to like pay his respects on top of performing a song that does, for him, I think, speak to a lot of his experience, which is why it's on the record.
Yes, I was going to say, like, I actually completely agree about the sequencing. In fact, if I think the album would marginally be improved if it came between the title track and Green Green Grass of Home, because that almost makes it like a bit of it adds like a continuity of like, oh, this is a song about me being dragged towards prison. This is a song about me being in prison, and then this is a song about me being out of prison. But that said, it is at a strange place that does disrupt the flow a little bit. But the reason that I am very glad that it was included is because it does again create an interesting direct dialogue between Haggard and Cash in the sense that like again, think about this. Merle Haggard's a guy again, working class, families from the Great Depression, like uh, hardworking, but also like is a criminal, but like again, like dude is from the dirt, literally. And there's this guy who's, again, from his perspective, a slick, hot shot, big music industry guy coming and singing in about his life in front of him, with his wife that, he's bringing out on stage and singing with him. By and large, you would think that this would be an interaction that might even cause a bit of envy or maybe jealousy or just some incensed anger in him or somewhat. But no, he sees a kinship with him over this, and then not only does that, but does in fact pay respect to him because he's like, we connected over our desire to like have a shared experience over this. And I'm just like, I think that that's a very strong, powerful, and undervalued sentiment, frankly.
Yeah, like we don't see a lot of that in the current state of country or really any genre of music. I
No.
don't, we've had a lot of, I've seen an increase in bad samples
Oh
and
God, it's a bad trend. It's a very bad trend.
bad interpolations and bad tributes, and none of it feels like a genuine want to make a connection with whatever your chosen predecessor may be. If I name names, I'm never gonna stop, so I'm not gonna. But you get what I'm saying. Of
Hmm.
we're in a period now where like we're cashing in before we're paying our respects, and this feels more like paying respects in the same way that all the American Johnny Cash albums do.
Hmm.
Of right, first and foremost, this is about preserving the art and performing it as an extension of yourself, right? It honestly, for me, it demonstrates a bit of humility in the ability of these guys to find songs that speak to them and find ways to incorporate it into their music. And I think the best comparison for this that's going to make what we're talking about click with a lot of people is Fast Car last year.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
That feels like a real move backwards in a good way to
Hmm.
the idea of a musical tribute over a marketing scam involving putting stealing the riff from Blue Dabba D or whatever.
it's it's something that like that cover to me, and why I ultimately came out a bit more like in favor of it than against it, despite the fact that like musically I'm just like, yeah, it's Fast Car. But why I'm okay with it is because it displays an active attempt at reverence, but also it's something that attempts to bridge a cultural gap that is conscious of differences like race and sexuality and gender, but is not simultaneously confined by those things. You are actively thinking about it because of the context, but you are not impeded by its presence. It's not a stumbling block on your way to engage with what they are actually doing. That
Yeah.
does take something. There is an art to that. It's a bit simplistic here, and I would really like it if country music decided to get more creative, like on in this instance, like Johnny Cash, like Merle Haggard. If if artists could somehow become more insular by being more, paying more tribute and having more homage, it's like we need to stop the sense of like cultural stagnation and like just sort of find an equilibrium where we are taking enough from everything to be modern, but preserving enough of what's old to I guess to make sure that the traditions that came before us are still respected and given what they're owed.
Yeah. And this is a thing that I think both of these albums are really good at is placing itself in a dialogue with the culture around it, but also making sure that there's an additive there in different
Yes.
ways for the different albums, but there's always, right, you're not going to walk away just thinking, that was a really good cover of, Folsom Prison Blues and this good Dolly Parton song that I like.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to walk away thinking of how doing those songs serves Merle's vision of himself as an artist and as a person. And that I think is really powerful and a thing that really stuck with me as I listened to this album in 2024.
And really it's just an excuse to I think that like it's certainly like this is has like the most notable song from one of Outlaw Country's biggest voices, but like it also just kind of it was a bit disparaging to see like the discrepancy between like the amount of ratings between like all of the highly rated Outlaw Country releases on a website like Rate Your Music, which granted is not the best barometer to judge the climate of how people consume country music, but again, you're not going to hear many people talking about and recommending a bunch of albums of classic country standards from the 1960s these days. It's just not something that's very in vogue. It's not very gauche. But that said, Folsom Prison Blues, like, I mean, a classic song and At Folsom Prison, classic album. Listen to it if you haven't, but like, also listen to it in context with Mama Tried, which is a much less heard album, but also these two records share a fascinating relationship that'll give you so much just from two albums that honestly, like, they're really short for records that contain as much information as they do. It's
Yeah,
like
they're
Mama
not
Tried
like
is
it is a
like
live
fucking 30
album.
minutes long.
Yeah, Mama Tried. I listened to it on loop like 3 times by accident,
Yeah,
just doing stuff around the house today.
it's just one of those albums that works that way. And again, these they thrive under song construction that's just super duper tight. And you really appreciate all of the added instrumental details that everything brings to the table. They're really musically proficient, but like there's just a really solid balance. And may I say too, it's just there's been a lot of like big things in music recently. Like we talked about two double albums this week. We've talked about the whole fucking Kendrick and Drake thing, and it's just like I can't tell you how nice it was to listen to two albums that like nobody around me within like 20 miles has listened to in like 10 years probably. It's just like I could just listen to this and be in my own nice little world, and it is a beautiful little escape. And I'm listening to a man sing about prison. Something feels off here. Cognitive dissonance. What's that?
Well,
Still, regardless.
I have something I would like to say about this that I've been thinking today. We've been we have been and we do talk a lot about how historical context informs a work. And I want to set a very clear precedent. There's a difference in that when discussing art and what we are moving towards, which is maybe what we're already mired in a little bit, which is why I feel the need to bring this up. But the idea of lore around any
Yeah.
particular piece of music. I read an article in the New Yorker this week about a particular double album that has a black and white cover.
Uh-huh.
And this article drove me up a wall
Oh,
because
I remember the quote.
it's
Oh,
it's the writer basically saying that like it's not about the music anymore. It's
yeah.
about kind of the cultural
Social
signifier.
mobility.
Yeah, it's about cultural mobility and it's about what the music represents and it's about making connections between arts and life. And like I said, I want to make it very clear. Context is important, but there's a point where music stops being music and starts being a product, or more accurately, starts being a vehicle for a bunch of other shit that isn't music.
Well, and you're just cheapening that by describing it in that way. It's like, why would you? It's like, and you're not only that, but you're also doing a disservice to the people who enjoy something like that, that don't treat it as fucking like, clout. Like, ew, like the idea
Yeah,
that music is going to be subsumed by context as an idea is something that's so dangerous that I hate
like
it.
we talk a lot because it's a very um it's very tasty structure for music historians to
Uh-huh.
talk in terms of eras and what the vibe is around a particular album, and like the album cycle is a thing that can legitimately be criticized and deconstructed and mined for really good insight. But like we need to still be talking about the music. And I feel like we're getting to a point where we're not even talking about music a lot. We're talking about what the fact that a song exists represents, right? Of like, oh, now we have a song that is about this thing. But like, not to mince my words, is the song good?
There needs to be a sort, like with everything, there just has to be an equilibrium achieved, or even just like, not even that, an equilibrium just has to be sought out. It's that it we keep coming back to it. It's just that idea of passivity and consumption, that idea of just like, just funnel in the information, take it all in because I'm a human data bank. I'm just gonna process all the numbers and all the letters, and I'm not gonna have any meaningful experiences or believe in the transience of life because I'm a boring asshole.
And I think this happens, or at least it happened for me. I had this reaction to Eternal Sunshine where I was going in and I was wanting, like, okay, everybody's saying this is like the big divorce album where we're going to talk about a big scandal. It's Ariana's confessions. But then,
Yeah.
like, it's not, it's not really like the music isn't there.
No, it's like, and the fact that that's it's again, it all boils down to just like it's what I said when we talked about the that single for that Ariana album coming out, and I was just like, why do I feel like I'm listening to someone read a TMZ article at me? Like, why is this what art is now? Like, why is it just journalism? Like, this is like just why
Yeah, like
can't we have both?
why is
Like, why
music
can't we have them be their own things?
why is so much of music journalism investigative reporting? I
Uh-huh.
don't understand it. I don't think it's good for the culture. I don't think it's good for what we're putting out.
No, it's really not. And it's why it's very good to take a step back because think about this for a moment, guys. You're listening to us right now. You have at least YouTube at your disposal. That means you have an infinite library of information that contains so much like music and shit, and just take some time, carve out a little bit of your free time in a given day, in a given week or something, and just make a backlog. Find things that you've been meaning to listen to get checked off of your list or do something, and then just listen to something like this and make it an old album, an album that people don't talk about or something like that, from a genre that maybe people don't like about, or maybe that you haven't listened to a lot of, like country music, for example. Go back and listen to that and just have that. Just experience that. And then maybe do some research, learn about the album a little bit, and then you live with it. Because I promise you, it's a sobering experience. Like, I can't tell you, like, again, I've been having a lot of mixed emotions and mixed feelings and been pulled in a lot of directions this week. But the moments I spent doing things like listening to Merle Haggard, Johnny Cash, or the Cindy Lee album that we're going to be talking about on the show, probably a little bit before this is released, those were the most valuable parts of my week, not the big hype beast reaction moments, as fun to experience and as interesting to live through history as we are right now. I'm just saying, it's just, I stop and smell the roses every once in a while. It's good for you, I promise.
Yeah, like I like talking about music. I
Mm-hmm.
don't like talking about Entertainment Tonight. I just
Mm-hmm.
don't give a
And
shit.
this was so nice because it was born out of a total tangent. You know what happened is that, like, I'd watched something that had referenced Merle Haggard, and I was just like, you know what, I have not heard enough of that guy's music, and I have an outlaw country shaped hole in my life right now, so I'm gonna download a couple of that man's classics and I'm gonna give him a listen. Then I listened to him and I was like, damn, this is good. And I was like, Folsom Prison Blues. What a classic song. I haven't given that album a good listen in a damn long while now. And then I went on this tangent discovering that they were kind of connected somewhat. And then I was just like, yo, Jen, well,
We've
yeah,
been
turn
sit-
out,
we've been
yeah, turn
sitting
out
on
Folsom.
Folsom Prison for a couple years now, though.
That's true. That's true. I mean, like,
I
this was
remember pitching that.
something.
I remember we pitched this idea to each other a couple of times in the past.
Definitely. And I think I was waiting for the right angle because, like, Folsom Prison is like, it's such a monumental album that I almost feel like just doing a video about solely it isn't quite enough to sort of cover what a genius conceptual work it is, what both of these are really, and how they both make each other better. So that is the coolest part about this, I think. And, like, not to mention, it's Merle Haggard has a damn good catalog of music and albums that are not particularly very long. I actually think that the his technical divorce album that comes after this, which is absolutely heartbreaking, from 1971, is even better. And if you want to talk about continuity and dialogue between albums, let me tell you, this album about him being wary about trust issues with women and then his divorce album, there's a lot of interesting stuff between the two of those records. Let me tell you, definitely check that stuff out. So basically, this is just a overall broader thesis that's just like, hey, we know everything's cool and fun, but remember, kids, remember, don't get sucked into your phones.
Just like sit down and enjoy something now
Yeah,
and again.
like we
I
risk
don't want
coming
to.
off
I
kind
don't
of
want to
boomery here,
do.
but, like, I don't care. It's good to just sit down and be with yourself in that way for a while. It's healthy. It just is.
Log off. That's the
Yeah,
lesson.
it's true. I can't, like, we may be going through a bit of a slow content output on here, but I assure you, these past few weeks have been mighty valuable in sort of uncovering what kind of things we want to do with stuff like this channel. So, it's it's all coming up, jams and tea, baby.
Hell yeah. It's all coming up, jams and tea.
So, do you have anything that you want to fucking promote while you're here? Because, I mean, you might as well if you do.
Um, what the fuck am I
Are you
doing?
on any podcasts or anything else?
I No,
We
this
we
is
we have to be the most like podcastually incestuous group of friends that's ever existed.
I've not been on any of the other podcasts, and it's not like
Still though,
I've
we can
been
play
at.
7 degrees of Kevin Bacon with everybody. Like we can probably connect ourselves. Like I mean, if we want to be technical about things, we've had adequate Emily on our show, so we're like 3 degrees of separation from like ContraPoints now. So like I don't fucking know, man.
Okay, wait. I do actually have one thing to promote. Um,
Okay.
so this semester I was an editor on a creative writing magazine called Miracle Monocle that's run out of where I go to school, the University of Louisville. And that is online and you can find it. It's a nice anthology of poetry and short fiction and experimental work. I had a great time working on it, and I really recommend that you dive in there and look at some stuff because there's a lot of different kinds of work in there. And if you're interested in some current up and coming literary work, I guarantee you're going to find something that's going to stick with you.
Well, then shoot me that link and I will put that in the description so that y'all can check that out. Until next time, everyone, rock over London, rock on Chicago, Ford, built tough.
I'm surprised you've never done that one before.
I definitely have at some point. Like